0 viewers waiting. So I'm going to click go live. Don't know how it's going to appear on your side, but let us find out. Okay, I believe we're live, so let's just wait for some people to arrive and I'll begin talking in 5 minutes. Actually, maybe I shouldn't have gone live 5 minutes early, because then when people watch the archive, people are going to see me just stand here doing nothing. Well, I guess if you are watching the archive, welcome. I'm Luke Chow from the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis. We have a very small group here, including one dog, one canine companion. And in a few minutes, I'll start to talk about some common questions that people have about hypnosis, even criticisms or accusations against the profession, which I have some answers that I want to share. So if you're a hypnotherapist, you can feel free to steal these answers I'm going to share. If you're a member of the public and you just kind of want to know how we work and how we think, then you're going to learn some of that as well. Yeah, I probably should have waited until 4:30.
Yeah.
Do you watch a lot of live streams?
I do watch quite a few live streams.
Okay. You'll be on the mic, by the way, probably. Okay. Yeah. Hey, we have a viewer.
Most of the live streams I watch start streaming before they start whatever they're starting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is not unusual.
No, I wouldn't say no.
Okay.
We do have a question in the chat.
Okay. I will then answer the question in the chat at the end. I guess it fits the theme.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Okay, it's 4:30 p.m., so I'm going to speak to the small group that's gathered here in person and also online. If you're just joining, then feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I'll begin by introducing myself. I'm Luke Chow. I'm the founder of the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis here in downtown Toronto. I've been doing hypnotherapy for the past 16 and a half years, and over all these years, I've heard quite a number of criticisms and accusations, some of which are more, I think, valid than others. So what I hope to do today is to put together all these criticisms and accusations against the hypnotherapy profession or the practice of hypnotism, and to offer some answers to these criticisms. The reason I decided to choose this topic is that skepticism of hypnosis is seldomly actually based on knowledge of the subject matter. So skepticism of, let's say, homeopathy is usually based on knowledge of how homeopathy is purported to work. Skepticism of QAnon is usually based on actual knowledge of how QAnon is said to come up with their prophecies. But skepticism of hypnotherapy is seldomly actually based on knowledge. It's often based on what you've seen on stage, in Hollywood, or just conjecture, and seldomly based on like the scientific papers that are being published in hypnosis. So my purpose for talking about this topic today is to fill in these gaps in knowledge. And I'm going to answer criticisms or skepticism from scientific perspectives and medical perspectives and even legal perspectives. Because one of the questions that comes up is this like a real profession? Is this like legitimate? Now, some of this skepticism about hypnosis is because it's poorly explained, and I think that's because it's poorly understood, even by its own practitioners. And I do hope the hypnotherapists are tuning into this so they can kind of pass along to their clients or would-be clients some of the things that I'm saying here, just so the profession as a whole might be considered an option for the many, many people who suffer from issues like anxiety and sleeplessness and trauma. So it is true that over the years, hypnotherapy seems to be more widely accepted. It does seem like, along with the destigmatization of psychotherapy and mental illness and antidepressant medication, hypnotherapy is also more widely accepted. But because there is still a gap between the way that someone like myself sees hypnotherapy and the way the average member of the public sees hypnotherapy, I will attempt to remedy a lot of the gaps in understanding that kind of cause the skepticism. So before I get into some of the accusations made against the hypnotherapy profession, I'm going to try to define hypnosis in a way that every single hypnotherapist on the planet might be satisfied with. Because you can come up with definitions that someone like me might not be happy with. You can come up with definitions that a spiritual practitioner might not be happy with. So I'll try to like draw a Venn diagram in my mind of what all hypnotherapists believe, and I'm going to speak to what's in the center. So in the center of that Venn diagram that overlaps the beliefs of all hypnotherapists, you will find verbal suggestion. Among all hypnotists and hypnotherapists, stage, recreational hypnotherapists, there is the element of using words to suggest ideas and thoughts that you don't find so much in every psychotherapeutic modality or in the practice of medicine. So I'm going to essentialize hypnosis and hypnotism and hypnotherapy as the use of verbal suggestion. So there are only 3 claims I'm going to make to kind of expand upon this idea that it is essentially verbal suggestion. If these 3 claims make sense to you, you'll understand why people benefit after hypnotherapy. I'm not going to use the word unconscious. In a moment, I'm going to explain why I'm not going to use the word unconscious. It actually raises more questions than it answers. But so here are the 3 claims I'm going to make to essentialize hypnotherapy. 1, it matters to have a good set of thoughts and beliefs in your head. Right? So there is such a thing as a way of thinking that helps the people who have that way of thinking. If you believe that you can do what you set your mind on, if you believe that you're fundamentally a worthy, dignified human being, this will help the people who believe in it. There's also such a thing as sets of thoughts and beliefs that harm the people who hold them. So if you believe that your worthiness is contingent upon someone else's approval, or having a certain income or a certain car or whatever, this belief system will, I claim, harm the people who hold them. So the first point is that the beliefs you have, the thoughts you have, are going to make a material impact on the quality of your life. Second claim, we can accept new ways of thinking through careful listening. So right now I'm speaking to, admittedly a small group of people, but if you listen carefully enough, then probably by the end of this talk, your mind will be a little bit more knowledgeable and expanded. That careful listening can allow you to adopt new beliefs, new attitudes, new perspectives. The third claim that I make is that most people can listen well enough that another person's speech, such as a hypnotist's, can make a lasting impact. So these are three distinct claims, but excuse me, if you add everything up, it should make sense to you how a hypnotist talking to a client for 40 minutes, 60 minutes, and the client just being there and listening should have an impact on how they feel about themselves afterward. So in my view, this is what's at the center of the Venn diagram that describes what all hypnotherapists around the world are doing. It can be essentialized as verbal suggestion. Now, the fact that it's hypnosis and not just being lectured to, that bit is kind of what I think a lot of people focus on and then neglect the bit about the verbal suggestion. So hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness. It should feel like time's distorted, your bodily sensations are a bit different, you might be half awake, half asleep. That's the state of mind we call hypnosis, but even academics will debate whether hypnosis is a state or whether it's not a state and it's just like role-playing or something. So that's not actually in the center of the Venn diagram. But whether it's role-playing or a distinct state of mind, all hypnotists will nonetheless use verbal suggestion to affect their clients. So again, I claim that right there is how we can define hypnosis universally. So now I'm going to get to some of the criticisms made against hypnosis, and I'm going to start with the straw man. So in case you don't know, a straw man argument is when you overly simplify the other side's claims and you knock down the overly simplified claims and then claim a win, even though you actually haven't attacked the substance of your opponent's argument. So that's what a straw man is. The first straw man I'm just going to address is that hypnotists believe in past lives and other New Age beliefs or ideas outside of the mainstream. This isn't in the center of that Venn diagram. Not all hypnotists believe in this. I don't believe in past lives. I think it's actively harmful, in fact, to claim that you can take people back into past lives. Another straw man is that hypnotists act like stage hypnotists all the time, or that we act like hypnotists in movies. But I mean, if you're a lawyer, then you know movie lawyers are not exactly, representing your practice. If you're a physician, you know that movie physicians do not represent your profession very accurately either, and movie hypnotists do not represent hypnotherapists or hypnotists very accurately. They kind of represent a dramatized Hollywood version of us. Another straw man is that we're doing witchcraft or the work of the devil. No further commentary I think is necessary on that. I mean, you really would have to believe in witchcraft or the devil to begin with to actually accept that as a criticism, which I don't, and I think most people, at least in Toronto, don't. And the other criticism that I'm actually going to kind of put under the list of straw men is that hypnotists work with the unconscious mind. So, how can you claim to work with the unconscious mind if it's unconscious? Like, how do you drive down a road you can't see? It is a bit of an epistemological quandary for anyone to claim that they can talk to the unconscious or the subconscious, or that they understand the unconscious or the subconscious. And this idea doesn't actually originate with hypnotists. It was, if it didn't originate from it, was at least popularized by Sigmund Freud. Hypnosis, the history of hypnosis predates Freud by quite a lot of time. And the earlier hypnotists were kind of making quite a bit of progress with a number of issues. So I'll kind of talk a bit about a brief history of hypnosis. So hypnosis was being used before the invention of either as a surgical anesthetic. And it was, it wasn't as good as drugs, but it was good enough to have been used. Once either, and then, later drugs were invented, then, that's the more reliable way. But before the drugs were invented, hypnosis was a lot better than having nothing. And before Freud in the 19th century, there was a hypnotist, a physician, I believe, named Bernheim, who wrote a book about suggestive therapeutics. He was a member of the, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, the Nancy school from Nancy, France. And they were starting to get some renown. Then a young physician named Sigmund Freud decided to study hypnosis. He went to the Nancy school, and he studied hypnosis there. And he used it with some success, even published a little bit about hypnosis. But in my view, he didn't take it that far. And I'll talk about his criticisms of hypnosis in my next section, but essentially he disavowed it. And he went on to develop his own practice, which is psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis, in many ways, is a polar opposite to suggestive therapeutics, or in other words, hypnotherapy. In psychoanalysis, the practitioner kind of sits a bit out of view, and they listen, and they barely say a thing. The client does all the talking, the free associating, and the so-called talking cure refers to the client talking, not the practitioner talking. So that was Freud's invention of psychoanalysis. Hypnotherapy, the way it was practiced pre-Freud, is that the hypnotist would be talking to the client. I mean, there would be a little bit of back and forth, but essentially the verbal suggestion bit is the part that causes the change, not the client talking, in other words, as the means to change. So Freud's use of hypnosis was somewhat rudimentary, and it was the early hypnotist that he'd studied under. Now, what happened after Freud invented psychoanalysis is he got really, really big. As you probably know, in the 20th century, Freud is probably the most influential figure in psychology. And because he disavowed hypnotism, it was largely then disreputable types, like stage hypnotists as opposed to physicians, who would then, fill the gap and pick up the mantle, and they would do hypnotism on stage for entertainment, and that's kind of the impression that many modern human beings have of hypnotism. Now, if it weren't for Freud, people like Bernheim would have kept studying hypnosis, practicing hypnosis. They would have gained more and more disciples. The school would have grown. And perhaps people would see a hypnotist in 2023 instead of a psychotherapist when they have anxiety or when they have depression or if they drink too much or smoke too much. So Freud these days does not have the same reputation he did in the earlier part of the 20th century. So the way that scientific revolutions happen, the way that paradigm shifts happen, is that older generations kind of have to retire or die for their ideas to die with them. So, Freud had to pass, his disciples had to pass. Then we kind of we saw behaviorism as kind of a paradigm shift in psychology. But now serious psychologists take Freud with a huge grain of salt. A lot of his ideas are not just taken as gospel, like maybe in 1940. So I think it is time to revisit this technique of hypnotism that Freud had abandoned and I'll even claim threw under the bus. So the criticism that Freud had of hypnosis is that it only removes symptoms and it produces symptom substitution. So he claimed that you have to go deeper and you had to get to the root cause. But Freud's idea of going deeper produces some very strange ideas. And this is the epistemological quandary that I was talking about earlier, where anyone who claims that they understand that which is literally out of conscious awareness could be imagining things and not seeing things. So the analogy I'll use is that if we imagine that the unconscious mind is like a dark room, a completely dark room, that's what it's supposed to be, right? Now, I look into the dark room and I say, well, I can't see anything, so I make no claims about what's inside there. Now, Freud would look in there and he would make claims like the Oedipal complex and the Electra complex and penis envy and everything. He would make claims about what's in that dark room. And that's kind of why he's not taken that seriously among serious psychologists these days. So the idea that we have to get to the root cause is still being talked about by therapists and psychologists. It still seems to be a popular idea even among people who kind of disavow Freud. I'm going to offer to you an alternative paradigm, which is kind of more the paradigm that a hypnotherapist would follow. I'll do it by analogy. If a plant is withered, right, we don't have to ask who neglected the plant for how long. We can instead just kind of give it water, not too much water, but enough water and enough sunlight, and we can then expect the plant to thrive without answering the questions of who neglected the plant, for how long, why did they neglect the plant. Those questions, those lines of thought don't actually produce solutions the way that watering the plant and giving it sunlight actually would immediately help the plant. If a child doesn't know how to play the piano, we don't have to ask, why does the child not know how to play the piano? We can just sit them down in front of a piano and teach them how to do it. The question of how they got to the point of not knowing how to play the piano is not pertinent to how you would teach them how to play. If someone's afraid of dying, it doesn't have to mean there's any inciting event. It could just be it's part of human nature. There's no root cause, in other words, to uncover. So I advocate for kind of this educational model where we're teaching people applied philosophy in a way. Where I'm also not just addressing surface level symptoms. I'm kind of teaching people how to think like a confident, secure, and happy person. And, confident, happy, secure people, they don't get too anxious typically. They don't drink too much typically. And, if only our schools and parents and media taught us how to think like confident, secure people, then I wouldn't have to do it. But, unfortunately, we live in the world that we do. So I'm going to kind of tackle this skepticism now from more of a medical perspective. And the dominant paradigm about mental illness right now is contained in that phrase, mental illness. It's not just a mode of suffering or a normal emotion that someone goes through when they're anxious or depressed. It is an illness. It is, by analogy, like diabetes, right? I believe this is a mistake. So if we kind of, take an educational approach, and we believe it's possible to teach people what good thoughts sound like. If we believe it's possible to kind of sit anyone down who's been not guided properly by school and everything, and we kind of teach them, here's how you think like a confident, secure person. In most cases, they're going to benefit. In many cases, they'll benefit significantly. So, for example, people sleep better at night when they feel like they don't have to carry burdens meant for another person's conscience. People stop smoking when they love themselves and their aliveness wholly and completely, and they treat themselves like all life that is their responsibility to care for. People feel much less anxious socially when they feel like they are a level equal with every other single person in the room. Right? So, how are the people who have not been guided sick? How does the illness metaphor apply? Now, I know that you can do your medical research, and you can find how the neurotransmitters might be different in someone who's depressed versus not. There are methodological problems which are beyond the scope of this talk with a lot of medical research. I actually am claiming the paradigm is wrong. The society accepting suffering as an illness analogous with physical illness is a mistake. Again, I make that claim. If you disagree, please leave a comment. In my view, the right question to ask is not, what's wrong with this person? That's like the medical approach. What's wrong with this person? The right question to ask is, what has this person not yet been taught? Or how should this person think instead to be among those who sleep well at night, to be among those who just would never smoke a cigarette, to be among those who feel like a level equal with everyone else at a party? We do, for better or for worse, we do need instruction in how to adapt to the modern world. We human beings did not evolve for cubicles and social media and a world of abundance where you can have all the fats and sugars you'd like without depriving your brother of the same. We evolved for much harsher times. We didn't really evolve for times where litigators keep us safe. And we don't, really have to worry if we're 40,000 feet in the air hurtling through the sky at almost the speed of sound. So we do need instruction in how to be adapted to the modern world. The next skepticism or accusation I'll tackle is, does it work? Or, is it effective? And just to kind of describe the baseline or the base case, the bar for what counts as efficacious in mental health in 2023 is extremely low. I think it's because of this dominant model or paradigm that medicalizes suffering. So you might be familiar with the addiction crisis and the epidemics of depression and anxiety that we're talking about more in the 2020s, even though we have more medicines than ever before. We have more therapies and more modalities than ever before. We have less stigma than before. It seems like, people are not getting happier. The paradigm's not working. Psychiatric medication for depression only helps an extra 15 to 20% of people who are studied compared to placebo. Psychotherapy for so many people is inaccessible because it does take weekly sessions and for months or even for years. So what does the science say about the efficacy of hypnotherapy? Well, there is a gap between science and practice, but the science does exist. And I want to say that science is not really an ideal tool for studying subjective experience. So it's kind of like the idea that you might be able to improve art by making it scientific, or you might be able to improve music by making it scientific. I would challenge the idea. I actually claim that that we have all the humanities, like philosophy and art and music, and this is a different domain than science because in the humanities we're studying subjective human experience. In the sciences we're studying objective measurable phenomena. And it is kind of, putting a square peg in a round hole to take subjective human experiences and shove them, into only that which can be quantified and measurable. Nonetheless, to their credit, there is, there is an academic hypnosis community, and they do research. So if you go to PubMed and you search for, If you go to PubMed and you search for hypnotherapy, the last time I looked, it would bring up over 16,000 articles and papers. Just to give you a small selection, there's a 2019 meta-analysis showing an average 84% improvement in anxiety compared to the control group. There's another 2019 randomized controlled trial that shows that, to quote from the abstract, gut-directed hypnotherapy with supportive talks and medical treatment improved physical and physiological well-being significantly more than supportive talks and medical treatment alone. A 2023 systematic review showed that, quote, most studies show that hypnosis has positive effects in reducing anxiety, pain, nausea, fatigue, drug use, and length of hospital stays in oncological settings. And in addition, hypnosis has no side effects. The last point I might challenge a little bit, but if you want to spend a few days doing a deep dive, go to PubMed, type in hypnotherapy. You can find recent papers and historic papers alike. Now, the reason I'm challenging the idea that hypnosis has no side effects is that there is this kind of common idea that raises more skepticism, that hypnosis is totally safe. And I think the reason it raises skepticism in inquiring minds is that anything that's totally safe must be totally ineffective. So even water, if there were too much of it around you, would kill you. So nothing effective is going to be completely risk-free. So here are some of the risks that are often raised regarding hypnotherapy. One is the possibility of creating false memories, which, by the way, do not require hypnosis to create. I think most of the research done by Elizabeth Loftus was not done with hypnotized participants. It was done with people in a so-called waking state. So you don't need hypnosis to cause false memories. You also don't need hypnosis to cause re-traumatization. But because people in hypnosis are in a more highly suggestible state, I think it's important that practitioners avoid using regression. So we avoid taking people back to earlier life events to avoid false memories and re-traumatization. And we should be careful with speech as well, because we've asked a client who we've hypnotized to suspend their analytical, critical thoughts and to listen to us wholeheartedly. Another criticism, another possible risk is, what if a hypnotherapist takes advantage of their client when they're in a vulnerable state? So like, let's say someone's grieving a lost loved one, and then I claim I can help them talk to the dead. So this is basically covered by ethics. This is not a problem that's innate to hypnotherapy. I mean, if your doctor made that claim when you're grieving, you might believe them. So there's nothing about hypnosis specifically that causes people or prevents people from acting unethically. I'm now going to answer some of the more legal criticisms or skepticism. And the first one is, well, isn't hypnotherapy unregulated? Also stated as, hypnotherapy is not a real profession, or hypnotherapists are doing unlicensed therapy. So let me address this one. First of all new professions start out unregulated. It's only once there's enough critical mass and then the legislators actually have to do work does a profession then become regulated. But every profession that's new or small enough is unregulated by default. This is not a slur, the way that some people seem to think it is. Even psychotherapy in Ontario was unregulated until 2007. When I started my practice, hypnotherapy and psychotherapy, legally speaking, were on exactly the same footing. Right now, psychotherapy is regulated in Ontario. Hypnotherapy is not. So that means that I'm in the same group of professions as martial arts instructors, but I don't teach kids to hit each other. Yoga instructors, but I don't have people contort their bodies. Fitness trainers, but I don't have people lifting heavy weights off the ground. So unregulated, again, is not the slur that sometimes people seem to think it is. Now, there are two relatively high-profile cases in at least my recent memory where people used hypnosis and then caused harm. So in Florida, in 2012, there were a few high school students who'd committed suicide because they had, the claim is because they'd been hypnotized, right? That could look bad on my profession. So it was their school principal. And I looked this up. School principals in Florida have to pass a certification. It was a regulated professional who, I don't know exactly what happened. I don't have all the details of the case, but regulation would not have prevented that from happening. Also, if you work with enough teenagers, then some of them, unfortunately, might unalive themselves. And that might not be because of the hypnosis. That just might be because of the large numbers of people who he had worked with. The other prominent case was there was someone in Ohio in 2016 who was arrested and charged with sexual assault because he'd hypnotized his clients and then sexually assaulted his clients. That person was a lawyer. Again, regulation would not have prevented that from happening. People disgracing themselves don't seem to be hypnotherapists like myself. People disgracing themselves after hypnosis do not seem to be hypnotherapists like myself. Maybe we take it more seriously or something. So the next accusational answer is, why not just become a psychotherapist or a physician or a nurse or a dentist who practices hypnosis too? And this is the stance that's taken by some hypnotherapy associations that only admit medical professionals. So there are some hypnotherapy associations where you have to be a doctor or a nurse or a pharmacist or a dentist. If you have any kind of regulated profession that you're a member of, they will admit you. If you are not a member of a regulated profession, they will not admit you. Here's why. Oh, and they'll disparage people like me as lay hypnotists. So here's why. Hypnotherapy must become a distinct profession from all the other healthcare professions. One is that dentists and nurses just don't have the time to get good at hypnosis. So I'm seeing clients 6 days a week, usually 5, but I moved into a bigger space recently. So I've been seeing clients 6 days a week, usually 5. And I don't do dentistry, I don't do nursing, I don't do pharmacy, I don't do medicine, I don't diagnose or prescribe. There's literally nothing that I do other than hypnotizing people. And I feel like it's taken me maybe 10 or 15 years of this to actually get good at hypnotherapy. I don't see a nurse who's primarily a nurse and sometimes does hypnosis as having even a chance of reaching mastery of hypnotherapy. It has to be someone who does hypnosis, perhaps only hypnosis, 5 days a week or 6 days a week to achieve mastery after enough years. The other reason why not to join another profession is that the paradigms are dramatically different. So psychotherapists, in my experience, are harder to teach. It's harder to teach them hypnosis than, let's say, a community college graduate who took like general liberal arts or something. Because psychotherapists have to unlearn the entire Freudian derived paradigm to understand what I'm doing with hypnosis. The average community college graduate doesn't have to unlearn anything, so it's easier to teach them. Medicine is, at least in the 2020s or the 21st century, primarily about treating the body. So you put a molecule in the brain rather than ideas in the mind. Dentists have root canals to do. Chiropractors have adjustments to do. Hypnosis has to be seen as its own distinct, well-differentiated profession in order to serve our clients to the fullest of the practice's capabilities. This will happen as a matter of time. I don't know whether we're talking about 30 years or 90 years or 200 years, but as a matter of time, it's inevitable that eventually hypnotherapy will become its own profession on par with the other healthcare professions. It just is. It doesn't seem to be like in 2023. The next accusation is actually the one that I'll say is truthful. It's that the profession will never attract the best and the brightest from the most recent crops of university graduates because there is little money and prestige in the field. Big law, consulting, finance, computer science, medicine, these professions will attract the best and the brightest from top universities because the money's there. You enter one of these professions, you could make $500,000 a year in your 30s. I don't know a single hypnotherapist making anywhere near $500,000, and I'm already 40, so it's not me. So there is some truth to the idea, and unfortunately it means that the people in hypnotherapy are not necessarily representing the profession or its capabilities that well. We kind of get people who either don't qualify for or won't apply to grad school. We kind of get people who do want to be careless with epistemology and who don't care about rigor. I am stereotyping. There are very credible hypnotherapists. But the reputation that we don't attract the best and the brightest, unfortunately, there is truth to this one. If you do a deep dive, you'll realize it. If you kind of scratch the surface of the certifications and so on, you might be shocked by how easy it is to kind of consider yourself to be a professional hypnotherapist. But to me, the answer is not to stop practicing. The answer is not to like join nursing. The answer is to practice as professionals do. On the money side, because we work on relatively compressed timelines, but clients are reluctant to pay more than for, let's say, a licensed psychologist, and our landlords charge as much as for a psychologist. Economically, it's unfeasible for a lot of people to become a hypnotherapist. So this is a problem. On a long enough timeline, I think it's going to take care of itself. I think eventually, if hypnotherapists start to bill like veterinarians or dentists as people who do specific, well-defined procedures, as opposed to like counselors where you bill for your time, right? If we start to bill like veterinarians or dentists, then I think there could be more money coming into the profession. But if people kind of compare a hypnotherapist's rate with a counselor's rate, without considering the very short timelines that we're capable of working on, then economically it's kind of hard to make money in this field. So after all my brainstorming, those were all the criticisms and charges against the hypnotherapy profession and the practice of hypnotism that I could think of. Please type into the comments if you're listening, or raise a hand if you have any additional questions or criticisms, and I'd be happy to answer them. While you're typing or thinking of criticisms and skepticism and questions, I want to bring your attention to a website I've created called reclaimthehword.org. reclaimthehword.org. And the H word, of course, is hypnosis. So a lot of what you heard me talk about in this talk, I've kind of put in writing. So if you want links to the scientific papers I talked about earlier, go to reclaimthehword.org. You can hear me, you can read me like Freud and so on there. And maybe I'll put this talk on the website. If you come to our office in downtown Toronto, you can also get a cool little button. And it says "Reclaim the H Word" with the logo on it. So, yes, let's start a movement, and let's restore hypnotherapy back to the prestige that it would have if it weren't for Freud, and if people understood what the heck it is we actually did. So, I see that there is a question in the chat that was asked at the very beginning that I'm going to answer now. The question is, I've tried hypnosis audios and never really felt like they worked. Does this mean I'm not able to be hypnotized? So I'll try not to go on at length too much. I'm very reluctant ever to tell someone that they can't be hypnotized or that they're not able to be hypnotized. It's too strong of a statement for someone who's probably going to be on the planet for decades, or at least years, into the future, where sometimes people do become more open over time. Sometimes people let go of old ideas on their own over time, and that might make it easier to accept new ideas suggested by a practitioner. I don't believe that hypnosis audios are innately worse than, many hypnotherapists you might see live. There are many arguments for live experiences as opposed to pre-recorded sessions. So when I work with people live, I can kind of observe them. So sometimes I'll see their breathing change. Sometimes I'll see that their body jerks in reaction to something I've said. But the cost-benefit ratio of pre-recorded sessions is really good. I mean, my time is scarce. I charge a lot for my private sessions. I charge less for these group sessions, but still the cost-benefit ratio of pre-recorded sessions, especially the free ones you find on YouTube, it's so good that, I mean, even if there's not much benefit or no apparent benefit, at least you're not out a whole lot of money. So it could be worth keeping at it. It could be worth continuing, and perhaps hoping that the sheer force of repetition might make the message sink in. When I hear that hypnosis isn't working for someone, there are two things that I look at. And it's the two things that have to come together for hypnosis to work. So one, the client has to be suggestible enough. And two, the message has to be right. So like most human characteristics, suggestibility exists on a normal distribution or a Gaussian distribution or a bell curve. It looks like this, right? So if you kind of like plot out all your friends' heights, most people will be average in height, and some people are going to be exceptionally short or tall. Suggestibility is like that, where most people are average in suggestibility, and some people are highly suggestible, and some people are low in suggestibility. The idea I would challenge is that everyone can be hypnotized to the same degree. It doesn't work like that. It's like claiming that everyone's the same height. You'd have to be blind to a lot of facts to claim that everyone's the same height or that everyone can be hypnotized to the same degree. Some people just are more suggestible than other people. And, well, the good news about being lower in suggestibility is that it's harder for people to sell you a used car that you don't want. It's harder to kind of, like sob uncontrollably at movies. So suggestibility is one factor. And there is a bit of an academic debate about whether suggestibility can be increased over time. So, some people say yes, some people say no, but like with audios, if it's free or if you've already purchased it, you're not out more money if you try just listening to it over and over again, as long as, the suggestions are good enough. So on that topic, the content of the sessions will also play a factor in whether or not the recording is going to help you. Earlier I said that the bar for what works in mental health is extremely low. So, even if you feel just relaxed for a bit and you have to listen to it again after a few days, that probably counts as working. The other thing then is the substance of the suggestions, the ideas being communicated. So I said at the beginning of the talk that one of the ideas you have to accept to understand hypnosis is that there are better worldviews and perspectives and ideas, and that you can adopt them by listening carefully to them. So if the ideas are not good, then it doesn't matter how carefully you listen or how deeply hypnotized you are, you're not going to be served by those ideas. I'll give you an example. Let's say that you want to sleep less, so you get a recording that says that sleep is for weak people, and you shan't sleep. That's a really lousy set of ideas. People don't work like that. So it doesn't matter how many times you listen to it, you're still going to be falling asleep at night. The recording's not going to work because the ideas are lousy. So, yeah, if you're suggestible enough, then probably it's the ideas that aren't hitting the nail on the head or aren't helping you. If the ideas seem good, then maybe you're not that suggestible. And I guess the final thing to look at is, have you fallen asleep during the session? Because that happens. there's this false idea floating around that it doesn't matter if you fall asleep because you're going to hear it anyway. It's completely bogus. People who fall asleep do not retain what they hear when they're sleeping. And this is why sleep language learning tapes don't work and are no longer being marketed. Hypnosis is not sleep. You do have to be able to be at least aware enough to process what's being said for what's being said to make an impact on you. So that's a long answer, but hopefully that answers the question of, are you able to be hypnotized? And also, how do I explain that the recordings aren't working? So you could try different recordings with different messages, and that kind of speaks to the second factor. You could try repetition, and that kind of might help with the first factor. I have another question. The question is, if you haven't had success with a goal, could it simply be the goal? Yes. Yes. So earlier I talked about how the idea that you're not going to sleep anymore, or that you could, get by with like a very small amount of sleep, that will never be achieved by a human being. Reality doesn't work like that. You do want to define goals that are not too far from where you're at right now. Because probably if you're in the US or Canada, or most of the developed world, you're probably going to be on the planet for 75, 80, 90 years in total. And that's a pretty long timeline. If you start a marathon, as long as you keep putting one foot in front of the other and you stay in the race and you're moving in the right direction, you're going to cross a finish line. So like if you're only 50 now and you start a marathon, I mean, it's inevitable that by the time you're dead, you're going to have crossed the finish line. So, but one of the points I want to make there is that if you kind of start at the starting line and you imagine the finish line and you imagine they have to leap the whole thing in one bound, then that's where kind of people don't believe they can do it. Or they stop themselves from even trying because it seems overwhelmingly difficult. If you see it as, well, if you keep putting one foot in front of the other, you're going to cross the finish line. It's just a matter of time. It could be 8 hours. You could have an 8-hour marathon time, but you're going to cross the finish line, right? If you think like that, then it's not a lesser goal. It's not like you're lowering expectations, but also it's going to be easier to stay in the race if you kind of look at the next step and not all the way to the final goal. So I hope that's helpful. I'll leave a few more moments to see if any other questions come in. And if not, I'll just kind of do my wrap up. So thank you very much for listening. We have a free talk like this, which is both in person at 49 Elm Street in downtown Toronto and live streamed on our YouTube channel, which is where you're watching right now. It's going to be every Saturday in May. So in 1 week, in 2 weeks, and in 3 weeks, same time, 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to learn how to do hypnotherapy and you are in Toronto, I have an in-person certification course starting at the end of this month. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, please comment, please subscribe. And I'm looking forward to seeing you perhaps in future talks. And I'm happy to share any thoughts if you leave a comment afterward. Thank you. Okay, so just stop the stream.